Well, China takes a very different approach, that the Chinese Communist Party is still a Leninist institution, and they study Lenin, and I'm discovering that China watchers also have to read Lenin. So the United Front Work Department, for example, which is the main way the Chinese regime has of maintaining control at home and abroad, is straight out of the Leninist political textbook. Now, the Chinese argue that their system brings harmony in society, and it brings development and progress, and it brings stability. And they say that if you look at the way Western democracy works, it doesn't work very well, and China works much better. I dispute that. I think that it's true that the hundreds of millions of people have risen out of poverty in China. One has to ask, why were they in poverty in the first place? And the answer to that, of course, is the Communist Party. I think since the election of Donald Trump, there's been a rather alarming symmetry between the story that Russia tells about the world and the story that the United States tells about the world. So they both believe it's about great power competition. Neither of them has much time for alliances or multilateral institutions. Both think that the object of foreign policy is to make your own country rich and powerful rather than to follow any more value-based system. So I worry about that. I think that the Russian propaganda sort of central thrust is corrosive cynicism. It's all about money. The rule of law doesn't really exist. We're run by fools and thugs, and if you think anything different, you're just being gullible. And there's certainly echoes of that in the way that Donald Trump and his supporters look at the world, and so that's troubling. I think it's a mistake to look just at propaganda. I think that information is just one part of a much wider set of tactics used in influence operations, and they include everything from money to physical intimidation, subversion, financial warfare, lawfare, and so on. And the information bit may be the most conspicuous, but it's not the most important. I think in the European Parliament elections that there's clearly Russia likes polarization, and you see plenty of that around. I think that the real divide in Europe now is less between the traditional left and the traditional right, but between the establishment and the anti-establishment parties who defy characterization in those traditional terms. Well, I do think it's a mistake to focus just on propaganda. This is a bit like sitting in Warsaw in 1939 and discussing dive bombers. The point is not that you're being attacked by dive bombers, the point is that you're being attacked by one country and soon going to be attacked by another. So I think it's a real mistake simply to focus on propaganda. Political warfare has many dimensions. It's not new, it has deep roots. Technology has enabled some things that we didn't have before, particularly anonymity, ubiquity and immediacy, which the internet has brought, and very low cost. So information operations have become a lot cheaper than they were in the days of shortwave radio and telex machines and printing presses. But I still think that they may be a guide to what's going on, they may signal something, but they're often not the most important part of the operation. The real point may be to win political influence through subverting the political system with money. It may be to intimidate opponents with lawsuits. But you've always got to ask, what is the ultimate aim of this operation? And then when you've worked out what the aim is, then you can try and counter it. And it may be that you need to counter, that the best way to counter it is with information. It may well be that the information dimension isn't the one to counter. What you really need to do is to go after the dirty money, or some of the agents of influence, or some other part of the operation. Russian influence on Ukraine has many dimensions. There's the military conflict that's going on, there's cyber attacks, there's espionage, there's the whole economic pressure. But I do think that Mr. President-elect Zelensky has shown a remarkable ability to turn the tables when it comes to propaganda, and he is a much more effective communicator than Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin made his career in espionage. Mr. Zelensky made it by being amusing on television. And this shows. He's also got a much stronger mandate. He won a real election. Mr. Putin hasn't won a real election for years. Perhaps the very first time he stood you could argue it was a real election, though even then I would say he had unfair advantages. But certainly, Mr. Zelensky, coming as an outsider, has a real mandate. So he's got and he's also got a real message. He's saying he believes in za vashu i nashu svobodu, for your freedom and ours, and that the Russian passport gives you the right to be lied to, the right to be arrested for in a peaceful protest, the right to take part in an election where the result is known already, whereas the Ukrainian passport gives you the right to hear the truth, to protest peacefully and take part in an election where the incumbent wins. And that's a very powerful message. We remain to see what his career will be as a reformer and how he deals with all the many problems that Ukraine has domestically. But from a PR point of view, I'd say his approach so far has been absolutely perfect. Propaganda's always played a very important role since the Bolshevik Revolution, but it's always combined with other things. That's why we have the phrase agitprop, agitation and propaganda. So it's a mistake to see propaganda in isolation. It's always part of other things. I think the big change really has been technological, that in the early days of information warfare, you needed printing presses, you needed radios, you communicated by telegram or telex, and eventually by radio. But now you have the opportunity to run a global disinformation campaign from a smartphone, and you can do it for a few $100s. You can set up a website anonymously, you can buy some Twitter followers, you can get some content, you can tweet it, you can run a very effective operation for almost no money with a global impact, and that is certainly new. We've got quite good at dealing with the problems of the past. So we understood there was a military problem, an energy problem, a dirty money problem, a subversion problem, an intelligence problem, an information problem. All these different facets of the threat from Russia we're getting to grips with. But this is looking backwards, not forwards. And what worries me is the next generation threats from Russia, and also the threat from China, which is a far bigger and more dangerous adversary than Russia is. So I think that this is no time for congratulation. We may be awake, but we're not yet dressed, and we're certainly not out of the house dealing with the threat.